Hello everyone. I recently watched the video regarding Gamers Nexus. After watching it, I kind of sat on it before commenting. When I did comment, I felt like I could have said a lot more, but there's only so much that you could fit in a YouTube comment before it becomes hard to read, at least in my book. So I'm going to just do a full-blown recording regarding this, because really, my comments apply to anyone who's wanting to design a case. So, a couple things to be aware of before we get into it. For starters, my experience with helping in PC partless or actually building PCs is going to be with gamers or gamers who also stream. Therefore, I'm going to be rusty when it comes to workstation or server. I have no problem admitting that. I've spent far too long building one specific type of PC. My comments are going to be mostly directed at that, as that's all I really have experience on, as of late. Another thing, too, to be aware of is, due to AMD's dominance right now in the CPU market, I am going to be using AMD as the primary example for what I am about to explain. So with that explained, let's get into motherboard redesign. I think that ITX, DTX, and ATX should be the target for gamers. My reason for this is because any of the builds that I've advised on or built myself, the person that used the computer did not use all of the connections. When it comes to gamers, they only need the standard PCI Express X16 slot and an M2 slot. That's it. Now, if it's a gamer who's streaming, then you add an X1 slot. You need the X1 slot for capture cards. But even then, I don't think that that's going to last long because EVGA recently came out with the XR1 capture device, which does not require software and is USB-based. So it's certainly an alternative. But that's a separate matter for another day. The point is that MATX, as you can see with like this one right here, more than satisfies that. Actually, this is a newer model as far as I'm concerned because any of the builds that I've done within the last couple months were with the non-P model of this. The P model is new to me. I only recently noticed it maybe within the last week or two. As far as I can tell, the only difference between the non-P and P is the X1 slot, because my computer has this as the non-P, and that one I know for sure doesn't have an X1 slot. But moving on. ATX should be the target for workstations and servers. At that point, you are going to be using a lot more connections because I have noticed that in the past, some workstations do use crazy amounts of SSDs or crazy amounts of connections, whether that be PCI Express X1 or even X16. So I'm perfectly okay with ATX being the target for those places. That's just the general overview. Let's go ahead and talk about some more specific examples. My bad. So using AMD as an example, like I was giving you a heads up earlier, I think that A520 should be the target goal for really office type of stuff. It should be the one that's designed to handle APUs. Because you're really not going to be using an A520, well, I should say an APU, really for anything else other than a home server or office work. They're the only two reasons you would use an AMD APU. As a matter of fact, I have done some builds using an AMD Ryzen 3200G and a Seagate Iron Wolf 2 terabyte. That's my standard go-to configuration for a home server. As far as the other stuff is concerned, I think B550 should be the gamer's motherboard. I think that it should have the display connections completely removed, and there should be either more USB connections or something else on the motherboard. X570 should be your workstation and server type of motherboard. That one should feature more connections, and it should also have the display connections removed. I think the only time that a display connection should be present for a APU is in the A520 motherboards. That's a more specific overview of kind of where I'm going with this, but there's one other thing I do need to cover in regards to motherboards. I think another redesign that should happen for all motherboards, whether it be A520, B550, or X570, is in the drive configuration. At this point, most games, well actually almost all games, have moved to a digital download format. You will rarely find games that you would need a CD-DVD drive for in a computer. That would be like legacy games or something. So between that and the fact that people don't really use 2.5-inch SSDs anymore, I think you can remove the SATA 6GB connectors to any motherboard. I think another thing too you can do to kind of save space and make way for other connections or something is to completely ditch the M2 design. The problem with the M2 design is that you need 2 different M2 slots just to cover the various connection types. I think what should be done is a brand new connector should be made and put in the place of where the SATA 6GB was. When you put that new connector where the SATA 6GB are, it should be one that uses a cable-based connection and one that can feed off of the motherboard for power. From there, the cable should be able to connect to a custom housing using a 2.5-inch format somewhere in the case. Most cases still have a 2.5-inch bay, so it would be entirely possible to create a custom housing for an M2 that can slide in and connect to this new found cable or connection. Reason for suggesting this is if you can make a cable-based M2 and 2.5-inch connector that's versatile and can accept both SATA and PCIe SSDs, then that would eliminate the need for 2 different M2 slots, and it would free up the motherboard for other connectors or things on the motherboard. The next thing that I would say in regards to motherboards is, really this could go with either one, but assuming that you are able to redesign a motherboard and clear up some of these unused connections, perhaps the companies can look into whether or not it's possible to use quad-channel memory on all motherboards except A520s in this case. If you look at benchmarks for quad-channel versus dual-channel and or single rank ×4, you will find that quad-channel has somewhere between 20 to 30 FPS greater advantage on dual-channel or single rank ×4. For that reason, I do think that quad-channel needs to become the standard for gaming as well as all the other stuff. For office, it won't really matter. So I think that's another thing you can do in this particular example. I think A520 should stick to dual channel to keep it cheap, and it should work with APUs. Then B550 is the next step up, getting quad channel memory and has the motherboard design focused towards gaming and streaming. Then X570 should be a focus on really any workstation or server thing. So that one will feature all the connectors possible. That is how I think motherboards should be redesigned. With that out of the way, now I can talk about cases. So as I mentioned, the target goal for MATX or I'm sorry, the target goal for gaming should be MATX, DTX, or ITX. Workstation and server should be ATX. With that in mind, I think that cases should be compact and revolve around ATX, as they're probably going to be more common than workstation, assuming that you were to use the redesign I just talked about. So let me go over some cases so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. This is one of the cases that I used to build with a lot. Unfortunately, it's a legacy product now, and it's very hard to come by. But the HAF XB Evo, the reason I built with this thing pretty frequently is because it supports up to ATX. It has a bunch of features, such as handles, removable motherboard tray. The motherboard lays flat instead of being on the side of the case. It comes apart into 3 areas. That's the sides and roof. So there's a long list of things that I can say as a builder that makes this case really awesome. And it's why I stuck with it for so long. The only reason, well, besides legacy, the only other reason that I really didn't get to do many builds with it is because people want side windows. This doesn't have a side window, so unfortunately that's not going to work with most people. But yeah, I would say that if you could build a case like this and then combine it with some other features, you probably could make a really awesome case. I'll show you some other cases to show you what I'm mentioning here. This is the Thermaltake Core V21. The Core V21 is my go-to MATX case. The power supply installation is a bit annoying in comparison to other cases I've done. I will admit that. But given its price and modularity, it's something you kind of look over. This case just has insane modularity in terms of where you can install coolers, how you can position the motherboard, and really things like that. So it comes feature packed for such a low price. Usually I find it for around $70 US. The HAF XB Evo comes around $105 US. So you can see that it's certainly cheaper than the HAF XB while still maintaining that flat motherboard design. Well, I mean, you can use a flat motherboard design with this if you want to. But yes, so modularity is kind of the key point here, and with the HAF XB Evo, its key point is how easy it is to work with. But moving on to one more example. Knowing that compact MATX cases are kind of hard to come by, my next step in recommendations or builds is the Corsair Crystal 280X. Because people want their side panels, RGB, and this other stuff, it's very hard for me to have or work with somebody, you know, to have them use the Thermaltake Core V21 because it really isn't that fancy of a case. So sometimes I do have to go to the Crystal 280X because it has a side panel, RGB, and that kind of stuff. I don't mind to a degree. If the person wants to pay the extra money for it, then by all means, that's your choice. The reason I like the Corsair Crystal 280X for my alternative MATX build is because it just has features like magnetic dust filter, and it does have a separate compartment for the power supply, which is something I appreciate. It's very rare that you find cases, at least from what I've seen, that have a separate compartment for the power supply unit. Whether or not it helps with cooling is a matter of debate, but I think that it's a good way to design a case for cable management. So there's my 3 go-to cases when it comes to builds. So if a case could feature, you know, some stuff from this, or at least learn from these cases, I think that would be great. Because if you could get the modularity of the Thermaltake Core V21 and then combine that with the ease of building of a HAF XB, that would be a beautiful case. So, yeah, that's kind of really where I would say case design needs to go. It needs to be compact, and it needs to be easy to work with and also easy to pick up. Because I can guarantee you that cases like the Corsair Crystal 280X or even larger than it are a pain to pick up and put into boxes for shipping. Stuff like the HAF XB Evo and Thermaltake Core V21 is really easy to lift up to a table or put in a shipping box because of their compact design. Well, and in the HAF XB's case, it has handles, so that does help with it, but the Core V21 is pretty small, so it's very easy just to grab it by the sides and put it in a box. So that's the case stuff. Now, I'm going to deviate just a little bit and finish this recording by talking about some miscellaneous things. One feature I think that could be implemented into a case is a anchor or support system or mount for monitors. One of the things that I did with the Thermaltake Core V21 and to a certain degree the HalfXP EVO was I did use its flat and wide design to put a monitor on top of it, just temporarily, because a lot of the people that were helping were in the process of transitioning to a new setup, so like new desk and things like that. In that particular scenario, I just said, okay, screw it, just put the monitor on top of the case, only for a little bit, just so you can like get yourself rearranged while still using your computer. So that's where I realized that if you could create a case that could hold a monitor on top of it, or for that matter, anchor to a monitor, that would be really cool. As a matter of fact, you could possibly create an ITX build that has a mounting or anchor system specific to Asus Zen screens. Asus Zen screens are mobile monitors made by Asus. They're pretty unique and not very common. I think it's because people aren't aware that Asus does make mobile monitors, but if you were to make an ITX case that could mount an Asus Zen screen, you could essentially make a quasi-laptop out of it. I mean, in terms of like portability. You would be able to take that desktop with you and game, like if you go to a family member's house, or for that matter, if you are a traveler, you could take it to your hotel and game that way. Desktops will be much easier to upgrade and have more power than laptops. So yeah, if you could create an ITX case that could anchor or mount an Asus Zen screen, that would be awesome. But other than monitor mounts, I think some other things that should be mentioned here is related technology matters. Well, technology/science. This article is from a while back, but NREL has been very busy creating methods or creating carbon fiber from biomass. When this news broke out a few years ago, it was claimed that carbon fiber prices would go down as a result of this new approach to making carbon fiber. I haven't noticed it in terms of the price drop, but it is a pretty interesting idea, and I think that if more companies were to use this, then maybe that would happen. Carbon fiber would be amazing for our case because it would reduce the overall weight and make something like the ITX and Asus Zen screen build even more feasible. So yeah, if we could get that rolling, that would be awesome. One other thing that I think would be awesome in terms of this is fuel cells. This article is very recent. Basically, more than one science group or science company has been working on direct ethanol fuel cells. It has to do with the membrane of the fuel cell. It's a bunch of science stuff, but the point I'm coming to is this. Direct ethanol fuel cells aren't the only fuel cells out there. There's also hydrogen fuel cells. Now, if something like the HAF XB Evo was modified to fit one of these, you could potentially make a wireless case out of it, I think. But that would involve removing the drive bays and a bunch of other stuff to make room for that. Why I think it would be wireless is because if the case has its own internal container for the fuel supply, whether that be ethanol or hydrogen, then you wouldn't need a power supply at all. As a matter of fact, you could just fuel the entire thing internally. That means you wouldn't need to plug it into a wall outlet, and that's why I'm saying it could be a wireless case. Combine that with current wireless keyboards and mice, yeah, you could definitely make something out of that. You could make a really mobile case. So, yeah, I can keep going, but I think you see where I'm going with this. There's a ton of unused technologies or ideas out there. If a new case is to be designed, then the industry needs to change. Thanks for listening.